Hi friends, welcome to this bonus episode of the Bible Project Daily Podcast. This is a bonus episode in the sense that it was originally recorded on the 17th of June 2023 and made available as a thank you bonus episode to my patrons over on Patreon, the place where people have chosen to follow me and get access to all the free additional resources, and some people even support me financially over there. The reason it's being inserted today as a bonus episode is because we've just finished off a big season together working through the book of Deuteronomy, and I am taking a few days out to prepare the overview and the framework of how I'm going to approach and work through the book of Acts. So I'm going to finish off this week, these next few days, making some of these earlier bonus episodes on areas covering philosophy and psychology, and one might say a little bit of political philosophy as well, just to give me a little bit of time. I'll put those on and then we'll launch off together in the book of Acts, probably at the beginning of next week. These bonus episodes are created at the time when I've either been attending or leading one of the meetings that I attend regularly. There's a monthly one which looks at philosophy, there's a monthly one that looks at psychology, and there's a monthly one that looks at politics, and there's also one that focuses on what are called, quote unquote, some of the spiritual classics of history. At each of those, I'm able to either present my view based on a Christian perspective or just participate in a group discussion. And these then become the fruits of that labour and preparation then become the bonus episodes that I make available to people over on Patreon. And I have some news of how that is actually going to be going, probably in a slightly new direction in the future in the way I'm doing it. Anyway, thanks for being with me today. Enjoy this episode on Mencius, Meng Tzu, one of the fathers of Taoism, the man who's famous for asking the question, are people naturally good? Bye for now, and I'll see you back here tomorrow again, I trust. Bye-bye for now. Hello again. Here I am today recording one of my bonus episodes for you. Today I've been studying in preparation for my bi-weekly philosophy group meeting, the influential Chinese philosopher called Mencius. Now that's the romanization of his name, the fact being that he was mainly translated about 400 or 500 years ago by Jesuits who Latinized him, but he's also known to those of Chinese or Eastern heritage as Meng Tzu or Mengzi. You probably noticed that a lot of these philosophers I'm looking at, the stuff they created was written a very long time ago. That's mainly because our plan is over the next 2 years to work through a sort of history of philosophy, starting with some of the earliest thinkers, which is why you've not seen my opportunity to present my case for some of the Christian theologians and philosophers, but hopefully that will come along later. But we're quite a few hundred years away from that because we're still around 370 BC. So these are just my thoughts, the stuff that I prepared in preparation for going to the meeting and dressing and having the opportunity to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes and give my response to what we've learnt that week, and also what I, of course, do as a Christian is try and put it within a sort of react to it from a Christian perspective. So the plan will be, as always, I'm just going to give you a short potted biography of the man himself, then a little bit about his famous writing, a book named after him called the Mencius, and then a bit of a response to it. I suppose the term for it is an apologetic, and I hope to reference my reaction to him with some scriptural and some other quotes by other quotes by famous and important Christian thinkers. So I've called today's musings, Mencius, are people naturally good? So let's just take 5 or so minutes to just talk about who he was, give you a bit of a biography and background to him. As I say, his name westernized as Mencius, but he's also known as Meng Tzu or sometimes Mengzi, and the Z at the end simply is the Chinese phrase sage. So you could translate his name also as Meng the Sage. And he's a very highly influential Chinese philosopher in what has become known as Confucianism. He came after Confucius, but he's the person who really put the meat on the bones of Confucian thinking. We did a study of Confucius, who's about 200 or 300 years before this, some weeks back before I'd started recording my thoughts and reaction. And for me, his Confucius teachings very much came across, well, without being disrespectful, like a long list of sort of like fortune cookies, because they're little short phrases. But it's Mencius who's the one who seemed to sort of have systemized Confucius's thinking. Now, if like me, you were born and grew up in the 60s and 70s, probably your only experience of Confucianism is the TV series with David Carradine in the 70s called Kung Fu. Probably not a very accurate representation of Confucian philosophy. Maybe we'll get a better handle on it by looking at this guy Mencius. He lived during what was called the Warring States period of ancient China, and he was born in the state of Zhou around about 372 BCE. And he's considered the most prominent of all Confucian disciples, and his teaching has had a lasting impact on that philosophy, as I said, but also on Chinese thinking in general, as well as its ethics and some would say political thought up to this day. Confucianism is one of the state's recognized religions within China. In other words, people are not persecuted for following it. But when you look at it a bit closer, you would not be surprised to see that the Chinese government, why it wouldn't really have a problem with it. And on the other side of that coin, why they would have such a problem with Christianity. Now, as far as the man's life itself, very little is known about his early life or upbringing, but it's believed that he came from a high-ranking, almost noble family, and he received a very thorough education, which would have included those Confucian classics from a couple of centuries previously. And during his young life, he embarked on a journey to promote his own philosophical perspective, and he did that among the council rulers in the regions around where he lived, and more widely, which would suggest that he obviously came from a relatively privileged background to be able to do that. He was known later on to travel actually extensively throughout the whole, what we would today call the area which is today identified as China, and he did so engaging in intellectual debates along the way and trying to offer guidance on matters of governance and social harmony to the state and regional leaders. You see, Mencius' philosophy, it kind of centres around a belief in the innate goodness of human nature. He proposed that individuals, every single one, possess the seeds of benevolence, righteousness, and of all the other virtuous qualities that he believed could be cultivated through looking inward, self-reflection, to a degree, of course, education, and the pursuit of moral conduct. Mencius argued that it is the external influences in the environment that shape individuals, but the potential for moral growth is inherent within every human being if they look inward. According to Mencius, the foundation of a just and harmonious society would lie in the moral character of those who ruled it. He advocated for the idea of what he called the mandate of heaven, asserting that leaders who governed with benevolence and righteousness would and could receive the support and approval of the divine. But he didn't ever define what the divine was. It certainly wasn't a person. Mencius believed that a ruler's primary responsibility was to ensure the welfare and happiness of his subjects, and that it should be recommended that he be compassionate, fair, whilst at the same time responsive to the needs of the people. He also emphasized the importance of education as the mean to cultivate moral virtues, particularly within the ruling classes. And he believed that everyone should engage in self-reflection and strive to improve their character, and that should be an ongoing process. He also stressed the significance of good social relationships and the role of the family, but not in the way that we would in the West would look at the family. He very much focused on the idea of family devotion, arguing that people have obligations to their parents, their family, and the wider community, believing and proposing that the well-ordered society is built upon the principles of harmony, respect, and proper conduct, and filial loyalty. His philosophy has influenced generations to come since, and his text is now recognized as one of the foundational texts of Confucianism. His teachings were compiled after his death in a book which simply gets called the Mencius, and it consists of dialogues, anecdotes, illustrating his ethical and his political ideas. The book has become an essential part of the Confucian canon of writings, and subsequently was studied extensively by scholars and intellectuals, not only throughout Chinese history, but from about the 17th century onward by some Western thinkers as well, usually, interestingly, Jesuit theologians. Mencius' ideas did have an impact beyond China's borders. His philosophy of human nature and the idea of moral cultivation resonated with thinkers across East Asia and beyond, and his teachings continue to be studied and debated in contemporary philosophy, and they are recognized as giving insights into governmental ethics and the pursuit of a harmonious society. He remains relatively unknown in the West, except among intellectuals and those who study philosophy, but he is a highly revered figure in the intellectual history of China in the East. Okay, his book, his main writing, was called, as I said, the Mencius, and it's a book of conversations and stories, anecdotes, conversation usually with kings or rulers, and it is one of 4 books that a later Confucian historian called Zhu Zi grouped together as the core of orthodox, what today is called Neo-Confucian. In contrast to the saying of Confucius, which I said are sort of short and self-contained, almost sound bites to the modern ear, to me, I find them not particularly helpful. They seem little more than fortune cookies with no weight behind them. But Mencius is considered, what Mencius did in unpacking those, he extrapolated them out into long dialogues, including arguments and even sort of poetic prose to unpack them. It was the Jesuit missionaries who first translated the Confucian writings, and they kind of ignored Mencius to begin with. And, of course, being Jesuits, they transferred those writings into Latin, and it was some years later before they were translated into European languages. You see, at that time, they felt what they called this Neo-Confucian school was just a mixture of Taoist and Taoist contamination of the earlier Confucian thinking. The first to publish a full edition of Mencius outside of Asia didn't happen until Prague in 1711, but it attained little influence outside Central and Eastern Europe at that time. Even as recently in the 1970s, when Western theology began to turn its attention to this in academic institutions, there were precious few good translations of the early Chinese writing, leading to them often to be set up as separate courses rather than incorporated into the main philosophical course material. I believe that that's changed today. Okay, so that's the guy, that's what he was about. You can probably tell that there are some very core issues raising red flags in your mind if you're trying in some way to think that this teaching is compatible with a Christian worldview. A problem is, it only takes a cursory look at his teaching and his worldview to see that there are significant differences in both the conceptual framework that he has, but also the entire way he approaches moral and spiritual matters. You see, Mencius' teaching focused very heavily on the cultivation of what he calls moral virtues, particularly, as he defined it, the innate goodness of human nature. You see, he believed that all individuals possessed an inherently moral inclination. That's kind of the opposite of what Christians believe, as illustrated in the fall of man. And he believed that through self-cultivation, even education, one can develop these innate qualities to achieve states of benevolence, righteousness, and all these other attributes that he considered virtuous. He emphasized the importance of things like empathy and what he defined as righteousness, although I'm not quite sure how that was measured against any external standard. And he believed that creating this perspective would lead to social harmony and the foundation of a well-ordered society. But this stands in stark contrast to Christian philosophical and theological thought, because within the Christian faith we emphasize the fallen nature of humanity due to original sin. That we cannot look within ourselves to the solution for our problems. We need to look outside of ourselves and find our way home, if you wish, to be able to not only communicate with, but be influenced and be inspired by God himself through his Holy Spirit. You see, according to Christian theology, humans are born with a sinful nature and our need of redemption, not renewal, redemption first, then renewal, and that redemption comes through faith in Jesus Christ. Christian ethics center around our obedience to the divine commandments, the law of God, first given to Moses, but then perfected under the new covenant of grace under Jesus Christ, whereby we can begin to express the love of God, first of all to one's neighbour, and also seek a path of holiness by being led by the same God who created us. Whilst Mencius' teaching emphasized the potential for a certain type of moral growth, Christian beliefs acknowledge the inherent moral limitations of human beings of trying to do these things on our own, and place much greater emphasis, so one might say all of our emphasis is pointed outside ourselves and is based upon the divine grace and the redemption of God himself. Mencius is thinking that all individuals possess this sort of innate moral inclination towards goodness is the polar opposite of what Christian believes. The Bible presents a completely different view of human nature. In Genesis chapter 1, we see God declaring that every inclination of the human heart is towards evil from childhood all the time. And Paul, writing to the church in Romans, also said that there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands, and there is no one who seeks God. But all have turned away, and together have become worthless. There was no one, not even one, who is good. You see, the Bible suggests that human nature, at its core, is inherently sinful and fallen. And that's a much more difficult truth for pride-filled human beings to accept. It's much easier to accept that we have greatness within and that we can cultivate it within ourselves without the help of God. This stands in contrast to Mencius' belief in what he believed in the innate human goodness. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, entreated God when he said, "Grant it, Lord, that I may know myself in order that I may know me," which illustrates Augustine reflecting on the fact that the Christian emphasis should be on self-knowledge only to the point of understanding one's fallen human nature, in order that we might be motivated to seek God's grace and redemption. Which contrasts, well, you could say it's the black to white of Mencius' belief in innate human goodness. And when it comes to the idea of God himself, Mencius had a completely different view of the nature of, well, we couldn't even call it God. He would refer to it just as, I suppose, the divine. Mencius' philosophy and thinking in no way focuses or even plays any reference to the concept of a personal deity, barely a deity at all, or in any way of a possible divine intervention. Instead, he just emphasizes the importance of cultivating one's own nature and aligning oneself with what he defined as the natural order, the way, or the Tao, as some called it. Mencius believed that ultimately it was this harmony with the natural order of things that would lead to personal flourishing and social harmony. His teaching were only concerned with his definition of ethical conduct and how that could help initiate a proper, what he believed as a functioning society, one that accepted the hierarchical order of the times, but at no point paid any attention to questions of a personal God or a personal relationship with God or any form of divine being. Christian thinking, on the other hand, centers around the belief in a personal and loving God. Christianity teaches that God actively intervenes in human affairs. He actively intervened when he sent his son, Jesus Christ, on earth to break into human affairs, to dramatically intervene in offering salvation through Jesus Christ. And he still does that to this day by guiding believers through his Holy Spirit. The Christian worldview places a strong emphasis on faith, prayer, and the pursuit of a personal relationship with God. And all those things done in a way that point outwards towards the God who is above and above all things, rather than finding our greatness from within ourselves or our own resources. Thereby, Confucianism and Mencius thinking makes no attempts to focus on any personal relationship with a deity or even a divine force. Christianity places such a strong emphasis on the relationship with the God that it reaches a point of saying that we all individually have to establish a personal connection with God. Jesus' own brother, James, writing in his letter to the church in Jerusalem, said, "Come near to God and he will come near to you." And the Apostle John, telling us in his account of the life of Jesus, said that this pursuit, this direction of travel, is the entire meaning of life, saying, "This is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." This verse is only one of among many that emphasize the Christian belief in the importance of knowing and having a personal relationship with God, which differs entirely from Mencius's focus on just aligning oneself with this self-defined natural order, or way as he described it. And taken in the whole, the Bible teaching widely contrasts with all the Confucian and the Eastern mysticisms as exemplified by Mencius and others. The core difference in regarding the very nature of human nature, the idea that we need salvation, at all doesn't figure within the Confucian worldview, and the importance of a personal relationship with God. Now, Mencius would claim to have the well-being of the community at heart, and Christianity, of course, also values the well-being of community, but it places a greater emphasis on the individual's personal relationship with God, and demanding of us, willingly, in free will, righteous behaviour in the belief that the individual will one day be accountable for their actions in the afterlife. Protestant reformer Martin Luther wrote, "A Christian is perfectly free and subject to no one, but a Christian should be a perfectly dutiful servant of all and subject to all." And Luther here emphasizes the Christian teaching is to inspire us to lead a life of selfless service to others, in contrast to Mencius' focus on self-cultivation as the way to develop individual moral values. The Bible continually focuses on salvation and redemption as the only way to redeem not only ourselves, but the world around us, and live in harmony with God the Father who created us and loved us. And in Christianity, that salvation and redemption are only achieved through faith in Jesus Christ. Ephesians chapter 2, 8 and 9 tells us, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." And Luke, also writing in his book of Acts, says that salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven and earth given to mankind by which he can be saved. Theologian Karl Barth famously said, "God does not reveal himself in what is generally recognized as good, beautiful, or true, but in the scandalous and the absurdness of the human condition." Now, this quote, although I suspect slightly ironic in tone, underscores the Christian understanding that God's revelation will often challenge human notions of what morality are, and points towards the radical nature of God's grace from the divine perspective. In other words, God's dramatic intervention in history almost seems at times to be in conflict with the natural inclination of men and women. C.S. Lewis, in his book God and the Dock, mused, "If Christianity is false, it is of no importance, but if true, is of infinite importance. The only thing that it can never be is moderately important." This highlights the unique claim of Christianity regarding salvation, emphasizing its exclusive nature and the transformative impact that it is that will have on human lives. Distinguish it from Mencius' teaching on just self-reflection in order to try and cultivate these changes. My friends, I believe that the scriptures I've quoted, combined with some reflections of my own, I hope backed up by some Christian theologians, reflect the differences, the huge differences between the Eastern Confucian worldview and the teaching of Mencius and Christian biblical teaching. They highlight the key aspects, key differences, fallen nature of humanity, the importance of selfless service, not just service for the purpose of self-improvement, selfless service, and the scandalous nature of God's revelation and the transformative significance of the Christian faith. It is God stepping into history, into individual lives. That is the thing that makes the difference. So in conclusion, a critical analysis of Mencius' teaching in the light of the life and the ministry of Christ and the teachings of the Bible illustrates that the Christian worldview, the Christian perspective, the Christian faith is a completely different ethical framework for living our life. Because it shows the differences that exist between even these two worldviews' complete different conception of what human nature is, what its purpose is, and the nature of the divine. In other words, the nature of God. God is real. God is a person. He has personality. He has mind, emotion, and will, rather than just a nondescript force. Mencius' focus on just trying to develop virtues and social harmony through self-improvement does not explain away the reality of sin and the suffering in the world. For this, we need to recognize the Bible's revealed view of humanity's fallen state and our need for redemption, as well as the importance of the pursuit of a personal relationship with God. And I believe that understanding these differences provide valuable insights into the different spiritual perspectives that both these very different worldviews offer. I do hope you find that helpful.